in this video we are going to look at the abdominal cavity, the major peritoneum or peritonia of the abdominal cavity, as well as the organs of the abdominal cavity. Let's start with the peritoneum. So we look at the inner layer of the inner lining of the abdominal wall, including the diaphragm, that is called peritoneum. So here we have the parietal peritoneum as it lines the abdominal wall. Everything except the abdominal organs, including the abdominal wall, as well as on the diaphragm. The superficial most layer that we see here is the parietal peritoneum. The parietal peritoneum, as it moves further and it gets reflected upon itself and start going on the organs, it is called visceral peritoneum. So the most superficial layer on the liver, it should be the visceral peritoneum. The superficial layer on the stomach should be the visceral peritoneum, and superficial layers on the spleen as well as on the digestive tract or rest of the organs of the digestive tract, that should be the visceral peritoneum. The visceral peritoneum and the parietal peritoneum, both of them, they serve as the inner linings as well as outer covering for the organs of the abdominal cavity. Now let's talk about the fascia which is present in the abdominal cavity, which is comparable to the fascia in the thoracic cavity. We saw in the thoracic cavity we have the fascia between the parietal pleura and the thoracic wall, which is called endothoracic fascia. Similarly, as the innermost muscle of the abdominal wall is transversus abdominis muscle, the fascia which is present between the parietal peritoneum and the transversalis muscle is called transversalis fascia. So the loose connective tissue which connects the parietal peritoneum to the transversus abdominis muscle as well as to the inner side of the abdominal wall, including the diaphragm, that is going to be your transversalis fascia. Between the parietal peritoneum and the diaphragm, it is called diaphragmatic fascia. But then everywhere in the abdominal cavity, it would be present between the parietal peritoneum and any structure which forms the abdominal wall. So these are the parietal and visceral peritoneum, as well as we looked at the transversalis fascia which is present in the abdominal cavity. Now let's look at the connecting peritoneum. Connecting peritoneum, which is basically called mesentery, but then depending upon the organ, the mesenteries are named according to the organs. So let's look at the mesentery first, or connecting peritoneum first. The parietal peritoneum, as it further continues towards the organ, it forms a membrane which suspends the abdominal organs within the abdominal cavity, that is called connecting peritoneum. So let's look at one of the very good example of the connecting peritoneum. As we can see, this is your descending colon, and we see the membrane which attaches descending colon to the roof of the abdominal wall, which actually is reflection of the parietal peritoneum. Then it continues further towards the organ. While going towards the organ, it forms that membrane which suspends the descending colon into the abdominal cavity, and that is what you call connecting peritoneum or mesentery. Now, depending upon the organ, as the mesentery is named according to that organ, for this particular instance, we can say this is descending colon, and that is your mesocolon. Meso refers to the mesentery, which is prefix usually added to the organ. So mesocolon is the mesentery or connecting peritoneum of the descending colon. As we further continue into the pelvic cavity, we can see the rectum is also suspended from the roof of the pelvic cavity into the pelvic cavity, that is called mesorectum. When you look at the mesentery of the jejunum, which is the largest mesentery of the body, and so it is called great mesentery or jejunal mesentery. But so in general, mesentery refers to the jejunal mesentery or great mesentery, which is associated with the jejunum. Also in the great mesentery, or it actually is attached to the abdominal roof in this region, which is quite short. Then it spreads out along the jejunal loops, where it becomes much widespread. This structure here is called root of the mesentery, where it is attached to the abdominal roof. And the lymph nodes which are located into the root of the mesentery or inside the mesentery, which are located close to the root, those are called jejunal lymph nodes. As the major area drained by those lymph nodes are the jejunum, That's why those are called jejunal lymph nodes, and or also the mesenteric lymph nodes. Okay, so the jejunal lymph nodes are located at the root of the mesentery in the dog as well as in the cat, while we see rest of that is your jejunal mesentery. Now we are going to look at the specific mesentery of the stomach, which is called omentum. Now the stomach being attached to the liver as well as to the abdominal wall, the stomach has two mesenteries, one along the lesser curvature of the stomach and one along the greater curvature of the stomach. The mesentery which is attached to the greater curvature of the stomach is called greater omentum, that we can see it right here. Usually the greater omentum is going to cover the jejunal loops as we see it from the ventral aspect. Greater omentum is located on the floor of the abdominal cavity, but when seen from the ventral view it looks like they cover, or the greater omentum covers the loops of the jejunum. Starting from the greater curvature of the stomach, the greater omentum has greater omentum extends further downward and backward, and it folds back, forming superficial leaf of the greater omentum, which includes the spleen, that is your gastrosplenic ligament. So gastrosplenic ligament is part of the greater omentum which connects the spleen to the greater curvature of the stomach, and so this much part of the greater omentum would be called gastrosplenic ligament. So as we follow this greater omentum further, we can flip it over and we can see the inner layer of the greater omentum, and that is your deep leaf of the greater omentum. The deep leaf of the greater omentum, it follows the superficial leaf, and finally it will reach the abdominal roof, including the left lobe of the pancreas within the deep leaf of the greater omentum. So here is the attachment of the deep leaf of the greater omentum to the abdominal roof, as well as we see the superficial leaf of the greater omentum including the spleen. The part of that would be called gastrosplenic ligament. As we go between the liver and the lesser curvature of the stomach, we see the papillary process of the caudate lobe of the liver. It fits right into the lesser curvature of the stomach. When we try to separate those two structures from each other, we see from the lesser curvature of the stomach, we have the lesser omentum, which usually covers the papillary process and then gets attached to the visceral surface of the liver. Okay, so that structure here is the lesser omentum, that structure which is attached to the lesser curvature of the stomach, and that is your greater omentum, which is attached to the greater curvature of the stomach. More specifically, this is your superficial leaf of the greater omentum, and that is the deep leaf of the greater omentum. The space between the superficial and deep leaf of the greater omentum, where now I am putting my fingers inside here, that structure or that space is called omental bursa. Okay, so let's look at another structure called gastroepiploic foramen. So we are now looking at the ventral. We're looking at it from the ventral view. We have pushed all the abdominal organs almost more on the left side, so we can expose the right side roof of the abdominal cavity. We can see the caudal vena cava, we can see the right kidney, we can see here the caudate process of the caudate lobe of the liver, that is the pancreas as well as descending duodenum, and here we see an opening where I am putting the probe through that opening. The space which is present between the hepatic portal vein, which is going to be present here, the caudal vena cava, the lobe of the liver, as well as the root of the mesentery. That space is called gastroepiploic foramen. Is natural opening into the omental bursa, or space between the superficial and deep leaf of the greater omentum.